In 1939, war broke out in Europe and the Nazis spread across towards England. Who, living in this sleepy village of Tyneham, with 700 years of history and heritage behind them, would have thought that Hitler's war machine would reach across the channel and strike their village down? It was always foreseen that attack was possible from across the channel. Preparations were therefore made on the beaches. However, when the attack finally did come, it did not come from the sea. It did not come from the sky. It was not the panzers, tanks, or the secret weapons of the Germans that hit the village. The attack came from the British, and from behind them. So let's go back in history and find out exactly what happened to the little village of Tyneham. Ever since the First World War, the southern England counties of Dorset had been home to the Royal Armoured Corps, and Tyneham was very close to the existing ranges. There was a great need during the Second World War to train British and American troops in preparation for D-Day landings. This led the government in 1943 to acquire additional land. Winston required 2 towns for his training: Imber in Wiltshire and Tyneham. Winston Churchill's War Cabinet issued notices to the 106 properties in a 12 square mile area including Tyneham village. Sunday school teacher Helen Taylor pinned a hastily scribbled note on the church door reading the following: "Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given our homes, where many of us lived for generations, to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day and thank you for treating our village kindly." Just like the people of Imber in Wiltshire, they never returned. The parish of Tyneham didn't just include Tyneham, it also included hamlets of Povington, Eggleston and Warbarrow. These were all cleared at the same time as Tyneham itself. From the communal efforts of hauling the nets full of mackerel onto the beach, to the making of crab and lobster pot, every man and woman and child played their part. It was said that none of the men learned to swim, their philosophy being that if you were destined to drown, it was better to get it overdone quickly. They were clearly not adverse to taking risks, as smuggling formed a lucrative sideline. The original public telephone box has been identified as a K1 Mark 236 box of 1927, of which about 4,500 were erected. The roof sign dating from 1927. However, this box is a reconstruction, as a film crew whilst making Bill Douglas's 1985 film about Tolpuddle Martyrs damaged the original. National Elementary School was built in 1856, originally to house 60 children. Life was not easy for school children in those days. A school child recalls that the Union flag had to be saluted on entering the school. There was no talking, and even your knuckles were rapped if you held the pen incorrectly. When the Coast Guard station at Warbarrow was closed in 1912, nearly half the pupils left. Numbers remained low throughout the 20s, and eventually in 1932 when attendance had fallen to only 9 children, the school was closed for reasons of economy. The building was then used as a village hall, and the children were taken by bus to Corfe Castle School. Run along lines of almost feudal independence between landowner employer and his tenant labourers, the estate and village were directed from Tyneham House, a gabled 3-storey Elizabethan mansion of Purbeck grey ashlar built in 1523. It boasted grand mullioned windows that looked upon colourful gardens, immaculate lawns and a majestic avenue of lime trees. One of the 3 great houses in the Isle of Purbeck, it had been home to the Bond family since 1683. By the late 30s there were cracks shown in the village. The school was closed. There was no pub, no electricity, no piped water, and no development, unless the landowner sanctioned it. These facts probably made Tyneham very attractive to the MOD and the government at the time. Obviously they only had to pay off one large landowner, and compensation would have been small. This, coupled with the strategic location of Tyneham, probably sealed their fate. Ralph Bond, the last squire of Tyneham, died still bitter at the loss of Tyneham and deeply wounded by the government's shabby behaviour and broken promises to return Tyneham to him and his former inhabitants. But why didn't the government give Tyneham back? For that we have to go to 1948. By 1948 it was the turn of Clement Attlee's Labour government to break Churchill's promise, declaring, with reference to the emerging Cold War, that Tyneham would have to be retained permanently as part of the Royal Armoured Corps tank gunnery range. Generous financial compensation was paid out, but since most of the displaced were not property owners, funds were released so a special council estate, Tyneham Close, could be built at Sanford. After the war, much was made by the landowners and MPs about the return of the land. Many meetings ensued. A public inquiry, and the government produced a white paper setting out the need for land and training, etc. And given those circumstances, it didn't need to honour the pledges to return the land. That was pretty well it. The Elizabethan section of the Tyneham House was taken down by the Ministry of Works in later 1960s, which spurred a new campaign to free Tyneham, late in 67. The Tyneham Action Group was set up in May 68. In 1970, the then MP Ted Heath announced the setting up of a Nugent Defence Lands Committee to investigate which part of the Ministry of Defence holdings could be returned to private ownership. Whilst this was going on, the Tyneham Group were bickering amongst themselves, and they finally split into 2 groups. On the 5th of July 1973, the Nugent Committee finally reported, and amongst many conclusions they recommended that the site at Lulworth be released and the gunnery school be relocated at Castle Marson in Dyfed in Wales. The committee could not say what to do with the released land, except it should be protected and enjoyed. While the Nugent Committee had recommended moving the army, local councils and the Dorset County Council did the opposite. They said the local area and workforce needed the army's presence for economic reasons. Dorset County Council in effect had done a U-turn. The government published a white paper in 1974 saying it was unable to accept the recommendation that the gunnery school should be moved from Lulworth to Castlemartin. They cited the heavy additional cost of the move and the impossibility of making acceptable arrangements for sharing the facilities between the RAC gunnery school and the German army, who also used the range for tank training. They cited the reasons for being the heavy additional cost of the move and the impossibility of making acceptable arrangements for sharing facilities between the RAC gunnery school and the German army, who also used the ranges for tank training. They also noted that whilst there had been total and united opposition in Wales for the greater use of Castlemartin, this was not the case in Dorset. In February 1975, Brigadier Roy Redgrave unveiled proposals for improving public access to the ranges. In September, Colonel Sir Joseph Weld cut a tape marking the opening of Lulworth Range walks. Effectively, this was the end of all the campaigns to free Tyneham. So, who was to blame? The army? The government? Dorset County Council? The Lord of the Manor? It's difficult to say. Paradoxically, the fact that Tyneham was kept out of mainstream life meant that the whole area escaped the ravages of modern agriculture and tourism. Elsewhere, housing was built and caravan parks established. The area's traditional wildlife flourishes there as nowhere else, with rare and threatened species that include the Dorset Heath nightjar and the Dartford warbler. The village remains a monument, a quiet place, a village that's just happy to be hosting some sort of life again.